AV and technical preparation. Today is December 16th, 6:35 PM, Newmarket Budget Committee. And Tim, could you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so beginning with attendance, Chris Wolf is here. Chris Blackstone.
Here.
Ned Carpenter.
Here.
Tim Choi.
Here.
Scott Foster is excused. Justin Lucer, not here yet. Brian Hickey.
Here.
Daniel Honan.
Here.
Brian Rowley.
Here.
Dan Smith.
Here.
And Brian Ward is not here yet. Okay. So, we'll begin with public session. It is 6:36. Public session is open. Seeing no members of the public here, public session is closed at 6:36. So tonight we have questions to the school and town as a result of their presentations last week. So we will begin with the town. And Steve, welcome.
Thank you. You should have all received a memo from the questions that were provided to you ahead of time. I can just go over those, and if there's any follow-up questions from my answers, feel free. The first question was to give more detail what was included in the town manager's contracted services item, which was significantly increased by the town council. Yet, you know what, and I felt I forgot that when I did my presentation. We're going to be doing a study of our fire department. With the new bunk facilities, we have a lot of per diem firefighters, which is staffing our department. However, we have a town of 10,000 residents and only 2 full-time firefighters. The rest are volunteers, or as we said, per diem. Our concern was, where do we go from there? We have one political issue that everybody turns in the radios. We have a significant issue when it comes to crews that protect the community. We're just going to be looking at where our strengths are, what our needs are, what our weaknesses, and also looking at what are the appropriate staffing levels for a community of our size, and try to figure out what we need to do to build that up for the future. This is a hopefully get ready before something does happen, because as we know for everywhere, volunteerism is dwindling. People aren't getting up in the middle of the night to go put out fires. We have a great volunteer crew, but those numbers are dwindling. So just wanted to do the study and figure that out.
How many people, if you don't mind me, excuse me, how many people are in the volunteer company?
Last I knew it was about 50.
50?
Yeah. And that fluctuates. It's how active they really are. And yeah. The next one was what are the anticipated projects for the contribution to the Capital Reserve Fund? Well, we intend to install sidewalk on the upper portion of Bennett Way next. That segment would fill the sidewalk gap between Percy Lane and the lower portion of Bennett Way and 108 on Exeter Street. The estimate for that segment is of roughly $162,000. We may not have money available this year, but we should be able to do it in fiscal year 27. We do have a sidewalk plan that we pick, just try to chisel down on what number of sidewalks to increase that throughout the community. It was asked, the budget is requesting a 5.2%, $115,984 in the police lines. Just explain what the hourly rates for the police department. That $115,984 was what was already approved in the collective bargaining agreement that was approved by the voters 2 years ago. So no matter what happens with the amendment that we're putting forward, that still has to go in. The amendment that for the $294,000 is just above and beyond to do that hourly rate increase that we're looking at for to make it more competitive. So that's the point of that one.
To attract and retain.
That one is just contractual obligation. We
Oh,
already
okay,
agreed to that.
gotcha, yep.
The additional one that we're putting forward on the ballot is to retain and attract.
Thank you.
Yeah,
How many police officers will be down?
5.
Down 5.
Yeah. And I can tell you, since I've been here, that's the most.
Mhm.
We've barely ever done any. And it's, a lot of it is, hey, I can make $1 more or $2 more in X amount, or a situation like that. So we're seeing a lot more people jump.
Is it really that slim of a variance between?
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
In the past, there have been concerns expressed regarding leasing versus capital reserve sets aside, particularly regarding fire department equipment. Explain why leasing is the method used, why lease items are included in capital reserve funds. First of all, leasing is preferred because by the time we put enough money in a capital reserve fund to purchase something outright, the cost of that item is gone sky high for the period of time we're going to do it. Currently, the only reason why we're doing things out of capital reserve funds for leasing is the fact that we have additional funds in there that we can withdraw from. So it's not, at some point in time, we want to take them out of the capital reserve fund and put it in the operating budget and reduce the capital equipment. Because, in the old days, you would be able to put aside $50,000 a year and then 5 years buy a new ambulance. Well, you can't do that anymore. Or fire trucks, you have to bond. They're so expensive now. So it's just the way it is when it comes to equipment that way. It's not the old put it aside and pay for it once you get it. There was a 15% increase in legal fees. It seemed high. We've had the same amount since I started in 2012. We've had Tucker and Chindela on retainer. So unlike other communities where they have an hourly rate, we pay them that, and that we can use the town attorney as much as we want. It's been very beneficial for staff. There's a lot, second guessing, because we can say, well, is that legal? Well, let's call the attorney and ask. And they provide us with that service right away. Just as I said in the memo, when I got here, the legal bill in 2012 was $175,000. So it was much higher than what we're paying for unlimited legal access. Finally, what happens to Bay Road, Force Main, and Pump Station project with the proposed $5.5 million is approved in March, but the potential $2.5 million federal grant is not awarded. Additionally, what is the probability of the federal funding being granted, considering a $100,000 planning bond with the loan forgiveness and the remaining $3 million local funding? So, if the proposed $5.5 million is approved in March, the town is going to secure a $100,000 planning grant with 100% loan forgiveness and a $554,000 loan with 20% loan forgiveness for the actual project. Additionally, the town has applied for congressional direct spending grants, which otherwise known as earmarks. And while the project was not included in the Senate's budget, it is in the House's budget. Putting the town on track to receive $1.1 million in congressional funding. This award is typically finalized in April, so we'll find out right after. The sewer department also plans to apply for the state revolving fund loans and grants in June, with awards expected in September. If the $1.1 million congressional funding, additional grants or loans are secured, the project will be brought before the town council for review, and a decision will be whether to proceed. That will be early late summer, early fall. If only the current $100,000 planning grant and the $554,000 loan with 20% forgiveness are available, the recommendation is to complete all design work. This will ensure that the project is ready to receive future grants as they become available and to allow the town to act immediately in case of emergency requiring the replacement of the force main. So if the bond passes but we don't get the money from the feds, we're going to hold off on it until such time as we get the funding. And those are the questions I received. Any other questions?
Anything else?
In-
Go ahead.
It says 2.5 million in federal grant, and then down below you say it's 1.1 in two different places. Is that two different 1.1s, or is that the same 1.1?
It's the same.
Okay.
We've put in for 1.1. We're anticipating 2.5 with other grants available. So it's congressional directed spending. It's a weird float there that we're not sure exactly. That's why we have to actually bond a big amount and offset that so we don't withdraw the entire amount depending on what we get through Congress.
So it's like they're gonna repay you after you've made the commitment.
Exactly.
So you've got to pay for it and then you get reimbursed.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
So we have been successful. We received total amount, but we got to be redoing the dispatch center. Earmarks from the Senate side.
So just to remind everybody, the next meeting on the 6th of January is the public hearing. So if you have any other questions, you can queue them up for then. And then obviously if you have questions that you think about, we'll pop them over to Steve and to Todd. So they have an opportunity to make sure that they're prepared to answer those questions at the end of the public hearing.
Sounds good.
Okay?
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Okay. By the way, I just added on to the PowerPoint that I shared with you before. I'll send this to you, Chris, and you can have these slides afterwards. If you wouldn't mind, I kind of rearranged the order of the questions you had sent to me just to have them make sense as I was kind of progressing through them. The first question you had asked was about student and staffing ratios. You noted that the ratio has averaged 4.64 to 5.26, with 2026 expected to be 5.1. What is the student-teacher ratio for the Newmarket schools? I think there's a misunderstanding there. The math in that question is correct. When I shared with you the staffing pattern for the district, that included everything, including non-instructional staff. So certainly if you take the 194.98 total employees of the district and divide that into the 994 students that we have, the number 5.1 is what you get. But that really isn't very informative because that's generally not how we look at staffing patterns. What I'm showing you here is a breakdown of our grade band staffing patterns for the last 3 years to kind of give you an idea where they're at. You can see K through 2, this year we're at 15.3 per class. So basically what these numbers are, if you walk into a Newmarket school building and you walk into a classroom, these are the numbers you're going to see on average. For K through 2, we try to keep 18 and under. That's a recommended guideline. Every place else, the max we use is 24. As you can see, we're obviously under that guideline. Grades 3 through 5, you can definitely see it's a little bit higher, and certainly for next year, one of the things that's very challenging is the populations of students seems to vary year to year. Like I think I mentioned to you last time, we had 85 kids in kindergarten last year, and this year we've only got 65. So the numbers go up and down fairly consistently. I think that's the reality of a small school. As you can see, as you kind of work your way up through middle school, it's pretty stable there. At the 9 to 12 high school level, you can see classroom sizes are lower. You certainly can see, as I mentioned to you, we're definitely trying to right-size staff as we go forward, but what we don't want to do is make reductions too rapidly that impact the program we can offer to kids. And so we're slowly working our way through things. One of the things I think I want to acknowledge to you is in a small school system, there's only so much you can do to maximize enrollments. So for example, if you have an AP calculus class that seniors are taking and only 6 kids want to take it, you really need to run it. You can't have kids go through a curriculum sequence and then not provide it to them. And on the flip side of that too, when you have classes that are catering towards a special interest or special need, whether they're special education classes or whatnot, you have to run them regardless of how many are there. But you can see the staffing pattern is pretty true. If you've looked at like U.S. News and World Report named Newmarket Junior Senior High one of the top high schools in New Hampshire, they say our ratio is 10 to 1. I have no idea where they get that from, but that's what they say we are. So anyway, so that's the best I could do with that. All the other areas we have Counseling with our ratios we go by, so certainly rule of thumb is you want one counselor for every 300 kids. Given the size of our district, we have one psychologist in each building, things like that, that is just, it doesn't matter how many kids you have, you need to provide the staffing to provide that service. That answers that question. The next question asked about the average cost per pupil for K-12 education in New Hampshire in the 2022-2023 school year is $20,323, which is 4.8% increase from the previous year. This is higher than the national average of $15,825. In Newmarket, the cost per student K-12 is $28,080 per student. Why is Newmarket 40% more than the average? First of all, again, I don't know who did the math on that, but you are correct. If you take the number of students and divide it by the total budget, you will arrive at the number $28,080, but that's not how per pupil calculations are done. So the state, to arrive at the average of $20,323 across the state, they remove the cost of all transportation, all tuition costs paid, whether it's to career technical centers or out-of-district placements, and all food service revenues and costs. So that's all backed out, and then the cost per pupil is tabulated there. As you can see, I went back to 2021 state average. You can see in the left column that the 23-24 number for the state has not been published yet, so I don't have that. On the right, you can see the Newmarket average in 2021, 18,761, 21-22 is 21,902, 22-23, the year we were discussing comparing, we were at 22,866. So yes, that is roughly a 12% more than the state average. But obviously it's not 40%. And that number for Newmarket is is the real number that we reported to the state on the MS-25, correct? Thank you. I always get my forms confused. It's 23,532. I would project, based on the pattern, I would bet that the state average is going to be about 21.3, because that's kind of what's been happening. Some things I want to just remind you of, just in terms of cost variables here in this community. Remember, we do have a bond, and the bond is $39 million being paid over 30 years. The last year is 2046. That means $2.1 million every year is going to the bond. If you take the $2.1 million bond cost, divide that by the number of students, that's $2,150 per kid. Okay, so when you say we're 2,000 or so over the state average, don't forget we have a bond, and which is not to say nobody else has a bond, but I think it is a unique set of circumstances that Newmarket faced. We, for very, very good reasons, undertook significant debt as a community to refurbish our schools and give our kids, the kind of experience they needed to have. But in terms of being one town and taking all that debt on one town, it has a big impact. The first year of the bond, it was more than 10% of our total budget. And so it's important to keep that in mind. And then the last variable I just want to highlight is, and I'll talk about this when I talk about some of the student service related questions, but during the pandemic, needs did show up that we needed to address. And so particularly around behavioral health, mental health, we as a school system made some decisions utilizing ESSER funding to create some positions to deal with student mental health issues. And when the money went away, we realized that the needs didn't go away. And so we still needed to find a way to keep those positions. So there was that spike as well. The next set of questions was all around the grant that we got. And just to clarify, this is a grant we have already been awarded. So we have it. We're not waiting to hear about it. We got it. It will be at least $750,000. Basically, the way it works is over the 5 years, we will receive up to $250,000 per year to support school-based mental health services and MTSSB development. MTSSB is a term that's used in education. It stands for multi-tiered systems of support, and B is behavioral health. So we're trying to create across the system, pre-K through 12, mechanisms to address many of the emotional and regulatory issues our kids have. And the point of this grant is to help us review what we have for resources and kind of figure it out. In the first year, we're getting $165,000. The funding comes from the federal DOE in partnership with the New Hampshire Ed Department, as well as New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services, as well as Seacoast Mental Health. The partner we're working with primarily is Seacoast Mental Health locally. It requires us to hire one full-time clinical position. So basically what it will mean is we'll have a full-time clinician employed in our district to deal with student mental health issues. And then it also provides coaching to our staff, because one of the things you realize is you can put a system in place, but you got to make sure your staff understands what it is and how it's going to benefit them and how it's improving things at the classroom level, so it provides that. Basically, to accept it, we had to be committed to a 5-year process, which we are going to work through. And the intention really is to get to a place where our internal capacity can better meet the needs of all of our kids from a social, emotional, and behavioral health perspective. Probably out of the work that's done in this, there'll be some look at social, emotional learning programs, particularly at the elementary level. And at some point, we will probably make a decision as a district, is that something we want to do? That will not necessarily be covered in the grant, but it might be a choice that we make through the use of the grant. The next set of questions, we had a lot of questions regarding student services. This is a slide I showed you last Monday. So this is Newmarket's numbers from 2016 to 25. This is the state's numbers for the same time period. Newmarket, the state. You can see the pattern is virtually identical. Basically what happened pre-pandemic was you had a flattening off and a dropping of identified needs. The pandemic came along and it exacerbated a number of things, and so you see across the state, you see numbers spiking up. So the low of 29,195 up to 32,019 identified students across the state. That's about a 14% increase over that 4-year period that's represented there. Combining this with this slide I showed you earlier. This is our enrollments over that time. Okay, here's what's happening in the state for enrollments. As you can see, consistent pattern of declining enrollments going back, 10 years. And actually, if you look at 2023 was the last year that the state data was provided for. If you use that, our numbers, we dropped about 6.4% over that time period. The state dropped 7.4%. So the state is dropping at a faster rate than Newmarket is, but nonetheless, there is a declining in that. But to go back to this slide, one of the things that is happening is many of the students that are leaving our district are choosing to go to public charter schools or other public school options. And for many of them, we are still responsible for providing the services. So for example, if a student is at the Great Bay Charter School and they have an IEP, we are responsible for providing that service. And that's why when we budget $75,000 just to cover the IEP and special education needs. And I don't want to come off as a whiner, but one of the things that is happening in the state is there's an embracing at the state level for education freedom accounts, EFAs, which makes it possible for people who need to go to non-public and public charter options. But what that is doing is those places are not providing student services. So what's happening is the vast majority, if not most, significant needs are staying in the public schools. And so when you look at it from the standpoint of the distribution of cost, as more kids make choices to go to non-public school options, a higher percentage of those students are identified and they're staying in the public schools because that's where the services are. So that's part of what's going on here. And actually, if you go back to this chart here, you can see just before the pandemic across the state, there were 176,168 students. During the pandemic, more than 9,000 left the public sector, and you can see that number has not bounced back. So 9,000 students left and about 1,000 came back. So it's just the demographic is being skewed, so it's not as easy to compare our current data to past generations. Go ahead.
If you go back to that first chart, the mental health needs, as it's skewed up there, is there the one
The one you provided.
The one that,
Oh, us.
within our district.
Oh, our numbers, okay.
So is that, do you have numbers on, is there a particular demographic of those students?
Yeah,
In
we
other
do
words,
track them.
Grades 4 through 6, 8 through,
A significant chunk of them we are identifying, in fact, this is true across the state. The K-1-2 band, the increase in identifications is up like 9% in that one band. So what we're finding, in fact, we created a program at our elementary school because what we noticed was the needs of our K-1-2 kids in terms of their ability to sit still and perform in class was so significant that we needed a program to help kids with their social emotional regulation. So we created a program for that. So yeah, that's an issue. There is an increase, there is an increase in kids with specific learning disabilities, no question about that. But that's a factor that's existed fairly consistently throughout history. That being said, I do think when kids were not experiencing school in the traditional sense, kids that struggled more. And so now we're finding more and more kids need help to kind of get back on track. Certainly with any luck and resources focused, maybe we can, within 3 or 4 years, we'll get to a place where we're starting to see those numbers come down. Most of these increases, it's other health impaired, emotional handicap, it's that kind of stuff that is what's driving probably the significant jump.
it's on the younger.
There is a significant demographic in the younger level, yes, although I'd be lying if I told you we didn't see it in other areas. I mean, middle school, we're starting to see more kids that have some behavioral challenges that we're managing. Less so by late years of high school. Okay, so where was I? So this actually is state data. And if you look at the column, the third to the left there, it says age 6 to 21% change. These are total number of identified students in the state as well as the total number of students in the state. And if you look at that column that says percent change, you'll notice up until 2017, you could see it's all red, which means it was going down, 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 down. And then something started to change in 2017, so it's not just a pandemic thing. Again, I'm not a mental health professional, but I would anticipate you got something to do with the opioid epidemic is starting to factor in, and I think that's impacting families and family structures and making things harder. But I also think you hear a lot about social media and its impact on kids' ability to focus and so forth, and so we started to see the change. You can see in 2020, not surprisingly, there was a sudden drop in identifications. That's because of sudden drop in kids in schools. Yeah. But then the very next year, you see it was up 5.23%. So everybody that left that was identified came back the next year, and the increase was significant. And now we're pretty much on a pattern of growing by 2-ish% every year. And this is across the state. One of the other questions related to student services and cost. Basically, the question was, student services, the district, please expand on the composition of this budget category, the number of students served on the cost per student. The student services page indicated 21% of students are included in this category at a cost of $37,870 per student. This is, while the math on that is accurate, the logic in it is I would challenge. If you take the 203 students that we have identified in our district and divide that into the total student services budget of $7.6 million, it is $37,870. But that isn't how you calculate the average. It'd be kind of like if I walked into a room and Elon Musk and Bill Gates were standing there and they said, okay, let's do an average of net worth, and the average net worth is $150 billion. That doesn't mean I have $150 billion. It means I happen to stand in a room with two people who had a lot. And the same can be said about how you spend money on students. The first item, out of district placements for 25-26, we've budgeted $1,159,227. That is to address a single-digit number of kids who have out of district placements. Okay? A second thing to keep in mind is in 2023, the state changed the law, and it used to be that students could stay in touch with their public school and be serviced until 21. It now is 22. And it's worth noting that if you're still involved in your public school at 22, it's probably because you have a pretty significant need. And so those are some of the more expensive placements. So I'm told across the state there are now 80 students that are 22 and over, that are 22, that are accessing public education to the tune of about $4 million. So it's something to keep, again, and I don't want anything I say here to imply that I don't think it's a good thing to do. I just want you to understand the economics of what we're dealing with. The other thing I mentioned before, eligible students who live in Newmarket but attend public charter schools receive special ed services funded by the district. That hurts us in two ways. One, it doesn't count part of our average daily membership. So when they go to do funding, we don't get that money. But then we end up paying for their services someplace else. And often it costs more to do it someplace else than in-house, because either we have to send somebody over there and pay mileage and whatever, or we're paying a contractor that's attached to that setting. And that's why $75,000. And that's probably to service, I think, 9 or 10 kids. That's it. And then when you get, I'm sorry, Chris, you have a question?
No, well, I was just going to, before you moved on, so
Yep.
finish what you're saying, and then before you move on.
Okay. And so well, actually, I was going to go to the last bullet point. Is it related to that, or?
Well, what it has to do with is that, you got a lot of people here that are actually pretty into the numbers. And so, when you run the math and you come up with these averages like $37,000 per student and so forth, or pupil, I think the issue is we don't know the granularity. And so for our ability to be able to understand it. And part of our task here is to delve into the budget and try to get it explained in a way that people who are watching on TV and people who will be attending the public session and so forth, have the ability to understand. So, if we're spending $1.1 million, but $1 million of that is serving 2 or 3 students only, it's important to understand that. And then it's important, I'll take it even further, it's important for our state representatives and so forth to understand it and so forth, and to appreciate the burden that they've placed on the community.
Right.
By, instead of state funding it, they push it down to the town to take care of.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's important that we want to know that.
Good.
You can't know that without asking the
Absolutely.
questions and without getting into the granularity. So for me, and I think for others, we're all interested in why.
Yep.
And we don't mind looking at some core data to
Sure.
understand why. You see it every day. It's part of your job. It's part of your your role. We don't, and we're.
Yep.
I'll just use the phrase, we're sort of the transition point between the administration and the townspeople.
Right.
And especially right now, the townspeople are trying to understand why you had a revaluation. Instead of seeing the mill rate go down equal to the revaluation going up, they're seeing the mill rate going down only part of that. And so they have a tax increase that they have the questions for.
Absolutely.
And the details, the underlying details here are what's important for people to understand.
Yeah, these are very good questions.
Yeah.
So. Yep.
And the school board, we appreciate the level of engagement and involvement. The only caution that I would throw out is that if some of Todd's answers sound a little evasive, it's because they have to be, because of the confidentiality of the kids. There's a lot of specifics that can't be gone into.
Right, yeah, I can't say anything that might cause someone to say, oh, that's who you're talking about, because in many cases, when you're talking about these big numbers for out-of-district placements, I say single digit only because I don't want to give you an exact number, because it may cause you to do math that I don't want you to be doing. But yes, I do appreciate that, and I do think you remind me of a couple of things, Chris, many things. There are so many unique factors that are playing into this that are about the uniqueness of Newmarket's circumstances. As I mentioned earlier, the uniqueness of the bond level that we have undertaken, which is debt. The uniqueness of, as you mentioned, the reeval that has been done that is not just changing the tax rate, but it's kind of shifting some of the burden from one demographic to another. And I think we'd be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that there are people out there that are facing Nothing has changed for them except that they got a mailing in the mail that said your house is worth X, and suddenly they're paying more taxes than they did the year before. And I think we need to acknowledge that. And then the other piece, which I'll get into in just a second, is state aid has been at best flat, and at worst erratic and destructive. And just in my 3 years here in Newmarket, I've watched state aid swept and net grant aid go like this. And you're basically saying to the school district, okay, a year and a half from now, predict what the state legislature is going to do and be ready to cope with it. And so it's very challenging. And then on top of that, when we get into student services costs, they make promises to reimburse that they don't deliver on. And when I say they, I'm talking about the state and federal government. When we do these out-of-district placements, there's a thing called CAT aid, catastrophic aid. We submit for reimbursement for all this stuff. And if they funded us to 100% of it, we'd have $200,000 more than they gave us. They only funded 68%. Didn't matter that we spent the money to serve the kids, and they had promised that reimbursement, but that's another place where we're like, we have to absorb that. And I think what I'm seeing here in Newmarket is, there's no question, the taxpayers in Newmarket, you're one town, and it's all impacting the same people. And it's infuriating on so many levels, and I wish there was something we could do to change the system, because the system is flawed. So to finish this slide, so going back to the per pupil cost for student services, so if you do what the state does when they calculate per pupil costs for our student services budget, you remove the cost of out-of-district placements, you remove the cost of specialized transportation, and you remove the cost for paying for kids who are going to charter schools, and then you do it, that brings our average student services cost to be about $30,700. Now that is, and I don't have the exact number for what is for the general student population, but I would be willing to bet that's about $6,000 per student more for a student services student than for a student identified student versus the general school population. But it's certainly not anywhere near as high as the $37,870 that we were just talking about. And this slide, I attempted to try to capture basically what is happening. If you look at the top, this is the special ed aid. We call it CAT aid. It's the reimbursable aid that we are supposed to get. Historically, you can see FY 2019, the state allocated $22 million, 2020, $30 million, 21, $29 million, and then the last 3 years they've allocated $33,917,000. In 2023, they added 22-year-olds and then put in an extra $2.3 million at that time, but then did not fund it after that. So we're back to the same level of funding that existed in 22 and 23. This year, or actually for 23-24, because we're always behind the 8 ball in terms of getting reimbursed, the state submitted $50.3 million worth of reimbursable expenses, which means that the state did not make good on $16.4 million in costs that it basically handed off to local districts. And in Newmarket, that worked out to be $187,529 that we had to absorb locally that we should have been reimbursed for. So when you go back to that, we came in at 1.97 with all of that stuff going on. Imagine if we had building aid for the project. Imagine if the state fully funded CAT aid. Imagine if the state met its obligation for adequate educational, it would be a world of difference. Unfortunately, we live in the environment we're in. So I think I covered all the questions, but I'm happy to answer anything else. And I will share this with you, Chris, after this, so you guys can have the PowerPoint.
I'm just quickly trying to read and make sure we got everything covered. Anybody have any other thoughts that have come up as you're listening to all this? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I appreciate all the thoughtful questions.
Okay, so, thank you very much. Thanks for the responses to our questions. And everyone, thank you for your time to review everything and preparing those for last Friday morning. All right, so Patricia wasn't ready. She's had too many meetings, so we'll deal with the minutes at the next meeting. So next week, next time is January 6th. We'll have the public hearing on both the school and the town. Again, after you reviewed everything, you've come up with any other questions and so forth, we'll do the same thing, just the week before, the Friday before, we'll submit those questions to Todd and Steve and give them an opportunity to be prepared to share those responses at the end of the public hearing. The 13th is when we will vote on these town and school warrant articles. And if they don't pass on the 13th, then we'll reconvene on the 16th to reconsider anything that didn't pass. Okay? Okay, so with that, anything else that anybody else would like to add? No?
Can you just clarify, the 16th is only if the 13th isn't
13th, we have
resolved?
something that doesn't pass.
Okay.
We have the opportunity to reconsider it.
Have we gotten a list of all the warrant articles?
Not yet,
Okay.
not yet. That should be produced for us on the 6th.
Okay.
Okay?
And all those are at 6:30?
Pardon me?
They're all at 6:30?
Yes,
Meeting time?
everything's at 6:30. Okay, so if we have nothing more, may I entertain a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn made by
I'll
Ned
second.
Carpenter, seconded by Chris Blackstone,
Stone.
Blackstone, excuse me. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.